What if everything you learned about ancient Egypt was only half the story? The images you are about to see were hidden in archives, forgotten in private collections, and kept far from the pages of mainstream history books. These are the photographs, paintings, and visual records that reveal a side of Egypt that few people ever get to see. Ancient Egypt is one of the most studied civilizations in human history. Yet most people picture only the grand temples, the golden masks of pharaohs, and the endless desert stretching beneath a blazing sun. But Egypt was not just a land of kings and monuments. It was a living, breathing civilization filled with merchants, farmers, soldiers, priests, and ordinary families whose daily lives were captured in rare images that have survived for thousands of years. Through these forgotten records, we can finally see what Egypt truly looked like, and the reality is far more surprising than any textbook ever revealed. This rare photograph, taken in 1839, is believed to be among the very first images ever captured of the Great Pyramids of Giza. What makes this image so striking is not only the monument itself, but what surrounds it. At the base of the pyramids, small figures of local Egyptian workers and European explorers appear almost invisible against the sheer scale of the structures. The photograph was taken just months after photography was invented, making it one of the earliest visual records of one of the oldest wonders of the world. For the people who saw this image in Europe at the time, it was the first real proof that the pyramids were not a myth. It changed how the modern world understood the ancient one. For centuries, history told us the pyramids were built by slaves. But a rare painted record discovered inside a tomb near Giza tells a very different story. This ancient illustration shows rows of men organized into teams, each group carrying a name and a title. They were paid workers, fed with bread and beer, given medical treatment when injured, and buried with honor when they died. Archaeologists found their cemetery just a short distance from the pyramids themselves. These men were not anonymous laborers forced into suffering. They were skilled craftsmen who took pride in their work. The image carved into the tomb wall shows one foreman pointing toward the horizon, with an expression that looks almost like pride. This colorized portrait, reconstructed from an ancient painted wooden panel found near Alexandria, shows the face of an Egyptian noblewoman from around the 2nd century. Her eyes are dark and steady. Her jewelry is elaborate. Her expression is composed, almost defiant. These portrait panels, known as Fayum mummy portraits, were placed over the faces of the deceased and preserved inside their tombs. What makes them remarkable is how lifelike they are. This is not an idealized symbol or a religious icon. This is a real face, a real person who lived, breathed, and looked back at the world with an expression we can still read today. Looking at her, the distance between the ancient world and our own suddenly disappears. A rare papyrus illustration discovered in the early 20th century reveals something that surprised many historians. It shows an Egyptian woman running a small textile business from her home when surrounded by bolts of fabric, scales, and what appear to be business records. In ancient Egypt, women had legal rights that were almost unheard of in any other civilization of the time. They could own property, run businesses, inherit land, and even bring lawsuits to court. This small painted illustration is one of the few surviving visual records that shows this reality directly. Behind the temples and the pharaohs, Egyptian women were quietly shaping the economy of one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. This photograph taken in the 1860s shows the Great Sphinx of Giza almost completely buried in sand. Only its head rises above the desert floor. For centuries, the body of the Sphinx was completely hidden, and many travelers who visited Egypt had no idea the sculpture even had a body. Local guides would climb onto the neck of the buried figure as if standing on a small rock formation, When French engineers began the first serious excavation in the late 19th century, they found that the body stretched nearly 73 meters from paw to tail. This photograph captures the moment just before that discovery. A giant sleeping beneath the sand, waiting to be found again after thousands of years. An ancient painted wall discovered inside a royal tomb in Luxor gives us a remarkable glimpse into something historians rarely discuss: the food of ancient Egypt. The painting shows a royal kitchen in extraordinary detail. Workers are grinding grain, others are roasting meat on open fires. Clay pots line the walls. Servants carry trays loaded with figs, pomegranates, and loaves of bread still warm from the oven. The royal table of a pharaoh was nothing short of remarkable. Records show that feasts at court could include roasted goose, honey cakes, imported wine from the Levant, and fish freshly caught from the Nile. This single image tells us that the Egyptians were not merely surviving. They were living with a sophistication that would not appear in Europe for another 1,000 years. This ancient relief carved into a temple wall near Memphis captures a scene that could almost belong to any busy city in the world today. A crowded marketplace fills every inch of the stone surface. Merchants sit behind low tables piled with vegetables, pottery, and cloth. Buyers argue over prices. Children dart between the legs of adults. A man in the corner appears to be sleeping against a column, completely indifferent to the noise around him. What strikes historians most is the detail. The artist who carved this scene was not recording a religious ritual or a royal ceremony. He was recording ordinary life, the kind of life that rarely appears in official records. This image is one of the clearest windows we have into the everyday world of the Egyptian people. Among the rarest surviving documents from ancient Egypt is a letter written by a soldier stationed far from home on the eastern frontier. The letter was preserved on papyrus and discovered in a sealed jar near the ruins of an old military outpost. In it, the soldier asks his wife to send him sandals, because his current ones have worn through. He tells her the food at the garrison is poor and that he misses the bread she makes. He asks about the children. He says the desert nights are cold and that he hopes to return before the harvest. This letter was written over 3,000 years ago, but reading it now, the voice feels immediate, familiar, and deeply human. Soldiers have always written letters like this one. They always will. This ancient Egyptian painting, found inside a noble's tomb near Thebes, shows the annual flooding of the Nile in vivid detail. The water has risen over the banks and spread across the flat land on either side. Farmers watch from higher ground. Cattle stand chest deep in brown water. Children sit on rooftops, watching the flood, with expressions that are impossible to read, somewhere between fear and excitement. The flooding of the Nile was the single most important event in the Egyptian calendar. It was both a gift and a danger. The water brought the rich black soil that made the desert bloom, but it could also destroy homes, drown livestock, and wipe out entire villages if the flood was too strong. This painting captures that terrifying balance between life and destruction on which an entire civilization depended. In 1886, Egyptian archaeologists unwrapped the mummy of Ramesses the Second. The pharaoh many historians believe was the most powerful ruler ancient Egypt ever produced. A photograph taken immediately after the unwrapping shows his face in startling detail. His features are sharp and angular. His nose is strong. His red hair, still visible after 3,000 years, clings to his skull. What shocked those present was how preserved he was. The expression on his face was described by one French scientist as almost imperious, as if even in death, he refused to look anything other than commanding. Ramesses ruled Egypt for 67 years. He built more monuments than any other pharaoh. When this photograph was taken, the world was seeing his real face for the very first time. A rare illustrated medical papyrus, now kept in a museum in Berlin, contains something extraordinary. It is one of the oldest surgical manuals ever discovered. The illustrations show detailed drawings of the human skull, the spine, and various internal organs, all labeled with careful annotations. Egyptian physicians were performing brain surgery, setting broken bones, and treating infections thousands of years before modern medicine existed. One passage describes the pulse with a precision that would not reappear in medical literature until the ancient Greeks. Another describes a treatment for infected wounds using honey, a remedy that modern science has since confirmed is genuinely effective. This document reminds us that the Egyptians were not only builders and warriors, they were scientists. This early 20th century photograph, taken before the construction of the Aswan Dam changed the river forever, shows the Nile as it would have looked for thousands of years. Wooden sailing boats called feluccas drift silently across the water. Fishermen cast wide nets from the banks. Women carry clay jars on their heads, walking along a path worn smooth by generations of feet. On the opposite bank, the silhouette of a ruined temple rises against the sky. For the ancient Egyptians, the Nile was not simply a river. It was the spine of civilization, the road, the food source, the highway, and the sacred artery through which the gods themselves were believed to travel. This photograph catches one last glimpse of a world that was about to change forever. Among the most extraordinary visual records surviving from ancient Egypt are the trial records of tomb robbers from the reign of Ramesses the Ninth. These documents are accompanied by rough illustrations showing the men being interrogated, their confessions recorded by scribes in meticulous detail. One man described crawling through a narrow tunnel into a royal tomb and finding a queen's burial chamber filled with gold so brilliant it hurt his eyes. The thieves were caught, tried, and punished severely. But their testimony survives as one of the most vivid descriptions of the interior of an untouched royal tomb ever recorded. One of the Egyptians spent their entire civilization building monuments meant to last forever, and then spent almost as long trying to protect those monuments from their own people. A painted wooden toy found inside a child's tomb near Saqqara shows a small crocodile with a movable jaw, operated by pulling a string. It was carved with care and painted in green and yellow. Beside it, in the same tomb, archaeologists found a small wooden horse on wheels, a set of carved animals, and a leather ball. The discovery of children's toys in ancient tombs reminds us of something simple but profound. Children in ancient Egypt played. They laughed. They had favorites among their toys. They were loved by parents who chose to bury those toys with them so they would have something familiar in the next world. This small crocodile, painted and carved 3,000 years ago, is perhaps one of the most quietly devastating objects ever pulled from the Egyptian sand. This rare photograph, taken in 1898, shows an elderly Egyptian man identified in the original caption as one of the last surviving practitioners of ancient ritual traditions near the Temple of Karnak. He stands in front of carved hieroglyphs, his hand resting against the stone, as if in conversation with it. By the late 19th century, most of the living knowledge of the old Egyptian religious traditions had already disappeared. The language had been lost for over 1,000 years. The names of the gods had become museum labels rather than living beliefs. But photographs like this one capture something that no textbook can reproduce: the feeling of a tradition standing at the very edge of extinction, and a man who still remembered it. These images, from the face of Ramesses the Second to the painted toy of a child long forgotten, remind us of something that history books often fail to teach. Ancient Egypt was not simply a collection of monuments and myths. It was a civilization made of real human beings who worked, worried, loved, laughed, and built something extraordinary out of nothing but river water, desert sand, and the belief that what they created would last forever. And in many ways, it did. These photographs and paintings have survived war, theft, flood, and time itself to reach us here, and through them, the people of ancient Egypt are still speaking. All we have to do is learn how to listen. If these rare images from ancient Egypt left you curious about what other forgotten moments from the past are still waiting to be discovered, make sure to subscribe and keep exploring history with us. The past has far more secrets than the history books ever revealed, and we are only just beginning to uncover them.